This episode is all about the connection our students have with each other here at Starfish Social Club. So 2 episodes ago, we focused on the biggest factor when it comes to whether or not our kids have friends, and that was the concept of reputation. Last week, we focused on how important it is in our program that we give our kiddos feedback and that they give and receive feedback from each other. And today we're focusing on our third component, which is the connection, the relationships that our students have with each other. We're also going to talk in this episode about why we do not separate our kids in any sort of way. We don't separate them by age intentionally, and we do not separate them by quote unquote ability. So we're going to talk about why that's the case on this episode as well. With our students here at Starfish, there's one of the biggest reasons that I believe they have such a strong connection to each other is because our program is specifically for kids who are neurodivergent. Mm-hmm. The majority of our kids, most of our kids have a diagnosis of autism. Almost all of our kids have a diagnosis of ADHD. And then we don't have a diagnosis criteria in our program. So there's nothing that from a diagnostic perspective that says somebody can or cannot be in our program. We just have certain students that our program is more beneficial for, and that is kiddos who are autistic or have ADHD. We also have kids with learning disabilities. In the past, we've had kids with Down syndrome. We've had students who have genetic disorders. So really, it's really just anybody who is struggling to make and maintain friendships. Kids with anxiety disorders, mood disorders, mental health challenges. It really does not matter. We do not have neurotypical kids in our program, which is just kind of a term for anybody who does not have a neurodiversity. So any of the things that we mentioned, we don't have kids in our program that are neurotypical. And I think that's a pretty different model than what a lot of social programs are set up as. A lot of social programs, especially maybe in a school setting,
right?
It's more of a mentorship program. It's more of a peer buddy system. But the challenge with that is that it presents our students as like needing more help than other people. Right. It presents their challenges as more of a deficit that these other people don't have. And so they're here to help you be more normal. They're here to be your quote unquote friend or buddy, but that's not what a friend is, right? A friend is not somebody who is assigned to you. A friend is not somebody who walks with you between classes to try to make you look cooler. A friend is not somebody that, is assigned to your classroom one period a day as an elective. I mean, they're just very inauthentic, unnatural, contrived situations. So here at Starfish, we do not have neurotypical students in our program. All of the kids who come here, kids, teens, young adults who come here have a neurodivergent brain. Even if they don't have a diagnosis, we're so casual around here. I don't know if people realize that. We don't require any kind of, I don't care what doctors have said about your child. I don't care what teachers have said about your child. If your child is having a hard time, come on over. And I think it catches people off guard at just how casual everything is around here, especially if you're coming from ABA or speech therapy or, public school. We're just like,
people, some parents are, before they join, they ask if they can get a tour of our facility.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just a few classrooms, got a couple tables, but
it's tables and chairs and kids. Yeah, that's very true. That hasn't happened in a while, but we used to get that a lot. Can we come tour your facility? Have at it. It's pretty unexciting. We actually have literally nothing on the walls here. Literally nothing. And there's in the waiting room, there might be one thing.
I think
I don't even know if
sometimes
there,
some parts of the year,
it's
like,
seasonal. Yeah. There's nothing on the walls in our entire facility. Just because it's unnecessary. We could teach our classes in a park.
yeah,
I mean,
anywhere.
there's nothing that we need. Even our curriculum, there's maybe 2 weeks in our curriculum where we actually use an item or an object. One is a chart that we use, and one is barrel of monkeys. I think those are the only 2 weeks out of the whole year that we use anything besides just us and the kids and having conversations and discussions. So yeah, definitely there's no paperwork here. There's no, I don't want to see your kiddo's IEP because I can probably, figure them out in 5 minutes when I meet them anyways. But yeah, it's definitely, we're super casual. Yeah. So no neurotypical kids here. All of our kids, which means that our kids have a lot of shared experiences. The things that we talk about, the curriculum that we have here, I created, and it's based on the things that I've learned our kids don't know or don't understand or don't know how to do. So it's based off of our actual experiences with the kids, because so many of them have had so many similar experiences. And so when we talk about things in the class, whether it's part of the lesson that week or whether it's just something that a comment somebody makes or something that somebody shares, there's always other people in the group that can relate to that. Always. And so I think that's really amazing that the kids just relate to each other so much. I think last week in the episode on feedback, we were talking about how sometimes kids will say, well, I'm autistic. And then everybody, me too, me too, me too, right? So this has actually come up recently in a lot of the conversations that have either been initiated by kids or by us. But I think most of them have been comments that kids have made related to what we're talking about, but kind of tangential.
Yes.
But just an in the moment comment that kids make that we then take the opportunity to turn into a group discussion. I think anytime a kiddo says something that we can tell is bothering them, is emotional for them, is something that they want to talk about, is something that we feel would benefit everybody in the group. Anytime any one of those things is the case, we turn it into a group discussion. Because if one kiddo is feeling that or thinking that or experiencing that thing, guaranteed there are either other kids who have or who are or who maybe will, right? I mean, it's pretty universal. It also gives the kids the chance to provide support for each other. And I'm thinking of one situation, maybe a year ago, we were talking about the difference, one of our lessons in module 1, our identity module, the difference between things that we do when we're by ourselves and things that we do when we're in a group. And one of the things in that lesson has to do with talking to ourselves. And as we get older, we learn how to talk to ourselves in our head, in our brain, instead of out loud. When we're younger, we don't know how to do that. So everything we say, everything we think comes out of our mouth. But as we get older, we learn how to have an internal dialogue. Some of our students are late to the game on that. And so we have students who are 15 who still have just never really learned how to have an internal dialogue. And so one of the strategies that we teach is to start by turning it from out loud dialogue to a whisper dialogue. And at least that way people around you aren't confused because you're whispering instead of talking out loud. And then once you can whisper to yourself, just keep your lips shut and turn it into an internal dialogue. And so one of the students in middle school said that at lunch, she sits by herself and she talks to herself. And she asked us, if we thought that was okay, which first of all, nothing's okay or not okay. I mean, there's no delineation on things like that. But I opened it up to the group because I was really curious to see what the other kids would say to her about that. And it was interesting because there wasn't any other kiddo in the group that thought that that would be like an ideal thing to do. Some of the kids immediately said, oh yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
And some of them were just kind of like, well, they were a little more non-committal about it. But we had a really great conversation about why that makes it a little bit more difficult for us to make friends if we're sitting by ourselves and talking to ourselves. It makes it seem like we don't really want to talk to other people. It makes other people less likely to want to approach us. It gives us a reputation for being weird. So absolutely, the student can talk to herself at lunchtime if she wants to. Everything here is a choice for the kids. They can do whatever they want to. But being able to hear the other kids' feedback about it and their perspective, I think was really helpful for her. So it's just one example of times when kids bring things up, and because the kids are so similar and understand each other so well, we're able to just have a whole group discussion about it. Other conversations that have come up recently, maybe even just since spring break, we had a conversation, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I want to say. Our lesson was about friendships, and we were talking about red flags and green flags when it comes to people that we choose to be friends with. And so Ramiro was asking, what are some green flags? And one of the students said that for him, a green flag is someone else who's also autistic. And I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't aware that that was important to him. And as he said that, another student in the group said, do you remember how she phrased it?
I do not.
Something to the effect of, I wish I wasn't autistic, or something about just a kind of a more of a negative self-talk comment about autism. I wish I didn't have autism, something like that. It didn't completely surprise me because I know this student struggles with that. Sometimes she feels out of place. Sometimes she also really tries to get along with other kids in school and be part of the group. And we even hear her say things a lot when she's here that we can tell she's picking up from other kids at school. But you can tell that there's really an effort on her part to try to fit in at school. Whereas here, you don't have to make any effort at all to fit in here. I mean, it's kind of comes with the territory here. So I would say that here, she's just herself. She's very easy to get along with. She can hang out with anybody here. We were actually talking about that the other day. She can hang out with anybody here and be totally fine. But I can tell from some of the things that she says that at school, it's really important to her to try to fit in, but she also recognizes that she doesn't always accomplish that. So that was the start of the conversation. One student saying that it's important to him that people that he's friends with are also autistic. And then another student saying that for her, she actually wishes she wasn't autistic. So we came to a screeching halt the entire lesson that we were on, because that conversation is a very important conversation. This was a middle school and older group. And so we started talking about what it means to be autistic. And we started making a pros and cons list. And we came up with some of the things that the kids said that are difficult for them, because that's always where the kids go, right? They always have a list of things in their mind that other people can do that they can't, or that other people know, or, just things that are more difficult. So the first thing that student said was emotional regulation, that she has a hard time regulating her emotions and, making good decisions when she's upset. One of the other kids talked about how they tend to be more gullible, which I thought was really interesting. I don't remember who said that, but that they feel like they are more gullible, and that so we talked about what the word gullible means, and talked about like the word naive, right? Making sure everybody knows what we're talking about, and how it makes them more susceptible to being taken advantage of, being bullied, having fake friends, just all these kinds of things. Another student said that she feels like she has a hard time articulating what she's feeling or what she's thinking. And so sometimes she feels like it's hard for other people to understand her. And then bullying came up again, that the students feel like they are more susceptible to people not always being kind to them. So then I flipped it. And one of the things that we've noticed over the years that we've been doing this, the kids, every time we've had this conversation with a group, for the most part, have a very narrow awareness of what's easy for them, or what skill sets they have, or what's really awesome about their autistic brains. I'm saying this particular group was all kids who are autistic. Not all of our groups are 100% autistic, but we also use different language depending on who's in the group. So we'll say, autistic or ADHD, or, we'll say, even one of the kids said even dyslexic, because she has dyslexia, right? So we do make the language really inclusive. It just happens to be that in this group, all of the kids in that group are autistic. So we talked about how autistic people have really creative brains. Whether you're talking about artistic creativity, like drawing, creating, we have kids who make comic books. We have kids who love to write stories. We have a student who's won art contests. Even during game time, we always have half the kids that pretend play, that just make up their own games to play. I mean, they're just so creative. And there's, following the storyline, and 5 minutes later, they're on something completely different. And they're just so absolutely creative. And I don't think they realize that neurotypical people typically aren't that creative. Another one was memory. I bring this up to them all the time because I have a really poor memory. And so I always bring this up when we have this conversation, that autistic brains tend to have great memories. And it's funny because I remember several years ago, I had a student that said something about, I haven't had a Pepsi since 2016. And I was like, what? Like, how do you know that? I don't even know. Yeah. I couldn't tell you anything I was doing in 2016. But they have really amazing memories, especially for time, for when things happened, but also obviously for information, right? To be able to retain a significant amount of knowledge, usually around certain topics. But they also tend to remember things when they learn them. Whereas me, oh my gosh, can you please tell me that for the 7th time? They tend to, if they read something or hear something, they tend to remember it. Sometimes we'll even have kids that remember things that we've said a couple of years ago, or conversations that have happened. We still have kids that talk about other buildings we've been in,
Even social memories. A handful of students who are really good, or like are very engaged with each other, and like they have conversations, whether they go to the same school or different schools, or whatever it might be. They have amazing social memories about things that were talked about months ago or even years ago, and they always bring it up to that person, or even to me or Steph, whether it's birthdays or things that we did or places that we went to. Man, their social memories blow my mind, because I can't remember half the stuff, you know what I mean? Like that I talk about with other people that I know. And so for them to have that ready to go to bring up in a conversation, like it's incredible.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that just reminded me that our student, who's such an amazing artist, what was it, maybe 4 months ago, she brought, I think it was in the fall, She one day came in and had a drawing for one of the other kids because it was his birthday. And I asked her, so he's 8, she's 17, 18. And so I think I asked him, how did she know it was your birthday? Because they're not even in the same class. And he said, I told her in summer camp. Oh my gosh, this was probably October, September. He told her in summer camp when his birthday was. They only see each other in passing because he comes an hour before her, and she remembered and drew him a picture. Holy cow.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's
So,
so cool.
thanks for bringing that up. The social memory. They'll talk about people who aren't in Starfish anymore, right? So they'll have memories of kids who aren't here anymore, places that we have gone, just all kind, even games. Sometimes they'll be like, "Hey, where's that game?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "What game?" Another one on our pros list was their sense of logic and rationality. And really I would say that's what I use to appeal to all the kids here is logic and rationality. When we have discussions about something, when we're talking about something, we're just being very black and white and logical and rational. And so, yeah, autistic brains really thrive when they're able to be in situations where it just requires them to be logical and rational. Sometimes they just need support with understanding, what's logical and rational. But yeah, that they're great problem solvers.
Yeah.
Building, which goes along with the creativity. I don't know that we have many kids here who aren't builders.
Right.
So Legos, magnetic tiles, we've got marble towers here. Like anything, sometimes we have kids who build with things that aren't even like designed for that,
Yeah.
We've got Jenga blocks, but I just noticed the kids are such creative builders. I know even, some of the online games that they play where they're able to build things in the games. There was probably 4 years ago during summer camp, I actually had somebody that runs a Lego business here in town, and he came and taught Lego classes during our summer camp. And one time I was in the class, and I have zero artistic creativity. I'm very intellectually creative, but I can't draw. I can't even making things for the business. I have someone else do that. I can't make a flyer. Like, I'm just going to put it in black and white and put what it needs to say and be done with it. I have no ability to make things look nice. So I built whatever it is that we were building in the Lego class that day. And then I had my piece and 2 other kids' pieces. And I took a picture of the 3 of them. And I sent it to my husband at the time, and he said, "Oh yeah, I can totally tell which one's yours." And I said, "How can you tell?" And he said, "Because it's super lame." But yeah, so many of our kids are really great builders, and they'll just take things and they can see how the pieces can work together. Just that analytical mind. So that was conversation that came out of that a couple of weeks ago. We also, in that conversation, talked about how everybody in the world has at least one thing about them that makes them feel different. Everybody does. And so not trying to downplay being autistic and feeling different, just trying to help them connect to the rest of the world, right? That yes, I would imagine most people who are autistic feel different because they're autistic. And we talked about Ramiro. Ramiro feels different because he's the only one here who's neurotypical.
Honestly, though, yeah, absolutely.
But you also talked about that you wear glasses.
Yes.
And like sometimes that you wish you didn't have to, right? And then we pointed out there are other kids in the group who wear glasses. And so just that commonality, right? That not all of us wear glasses. And so that's something else that makes people different. We have students at Starfish that are physically disabled. So I bet they feel different, especially in summer camp when we do things like go to the playground.
Yeah, that's very true.
I bet they feel a little bit different. We've got kids at Starfish who aren't quite capable of having a conversation. So they sometimes are kind of on the fringes. I bet they feel different. We even talked about, we've got kids at Starfish whose parents are divorced. We've got kids who live with their grandparents. We've got kids who are adopted. We've got kids with all different kinds of skin colors. So just helping them relate to the world at large, that everybody has at least one thing that makes them feel different, right? It could be, your gender, your sexuality, your religion, your ethnicity. I mean, all kinds of things. So just kind of helping bridge that it's not just because you're autistic that you feel different. There's, that's a shared experience that I would say everybody in the world has. So that was our conversation about that. We've also, I don't remember if we talked about this on the podcast, but had a conversation about school multiple times, especially right now. It's early May, it's state testing season. Kids are stressed and anxious and worn out. And even some of our kids who don't do state testing, they're missing recess and they're, having to be quiet. And I mean, it's just so much going on. And really, none of it matters. It does not matter. Your child's score on their 5th grade math state assessment has nothing to do with their future, with the exception of school, right? It has nothing to do with their ability to get a job. It has absolutely nothing to do with their ability to be successful in life.
Absolutely.
Nothing. And yet it's very stressful for the kids. And, even our kids who are older and in high school, they have their own assessments that they have to pass to graduate from high school. And yeah, it has absolutely nothing to do with how intelligent they are. It has nothing to do with their future potential. It's just this arbitrary measure that makes them really stressed out. And so we've got kids that get stressed out about, we had a 3rd grader about a month ago that was twisting his hair, which I recognize as a symptom of anxiety when kids are twisting their hair. And so that was a newer thing. I hadn't remembered him doing that before, but it was pretty chronic. I mean, it was very constant. And he wasn't acting like he was anxious. Right. I mean, he was having normal conversations, totally engaged in the group, participating as normal, but he just kept twisting on his hair. And so when I asked him about it, he immediately started talking about school and his test. He's in 3rd grade. My point being that we have conversations about that as well, about how the score that we get on a test has nothing to do with how intelligent we are. Even we've got kids who have been held back or have failed. Often it's when they're like maybe in kindergarten for social reasons, right? It's not uncommon for our kids to have been held back in kindergarten because of their social development. But again, that has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. It just means that you're not, meeting the standards of this system, but has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. And our dating group, having conversations about if we like somebody and they don't like us, or if somebody likes us and we don't like them. So all these conversations that are really universal to our students here. We even talk about when we have our module about conversations, one of the big points we make repeatedly is that it's okay to try to join a conversation and not be accepted. Because while that happens to everybody, I guarantee it happens a lot more to our kids. And so we teach them how to handle that, right? Because I'm sure it's much more prevalent for our kids than for neurotypical kids. And so we teach them how to handle that. And when we talk about it, they all acknowledge that, right? They all can relate, or trying to ask somebody if they can play with them and having the other kids say no, right? I think our kids have a much stronger fear of rejection because of their histories. Yeah. Because it's happened to them more often. So there's just so many shared experiences that our kids have because of the way their brains work and because of how they navigate the world because of the way that their brains work
Mhm.
and the interactions that they have with other people. Anything else you want to say just about that? Any other conversations that I'm
I guess nothing specific, but thinking about it now, just through this podcast episode, the amount of times where, whether it is from our curriculum or just from a natural conversation that happens during our lessons, um, as soon as a student mentions something, like other students always chime in, or they always acknowledge like that they relate or that they can relate to that. It just shows how authentic and helpful and relatable all of our lessons are. Like, regardless if it's specifically in the curriculum or if it's just a naturally flowing conversation during our lesson time, that it really helps the students like genuinely connect with one another or connect with me and Steph in a way, and so I don't know, I just love it so much. Like, this is something that can't be done in a one-on-one setting. You know what I mean? Like, it has to be that authentic in like
in the
just
moment.
group conversation. There's a lot of things that I feel like the students learn here that they would never learn in any other lesson or class or whatever it could be. It it blows my mind. It's incredible. I love it.
That's very true. We've had conversations about when kids are having a lot of conflict with parents. That's come up a few times where kids talk about that. And obviously the situation is different for everybody. Not all of our kids have conflict with parents. But there are always a handful of kids that can relate to that, right? It came up last week in one of our lessons, a student, a young kiddo, having some conflict with her parents. And then we have some older students where it's kind of a theme that comes up. And so Ramiro and I, kind of help support the kids through those conversations. We also, I feel like part of our role, I had somebody tell me one time that I'm an interpreter. It was actually really interesting because it was I was having an energy reading, very scientific of me, I know. But I was having an energy reading and it was on Zoom. And this woman had no idea what I do. We had not talked, we had not met, I had not filled out a form. She had no idea what I do. And so just a couple minutes in, she said, I feel like you're an interpreter. She said, you do something where you help people understand each other. And I was like, holy cow, like that. I've never thought of it that way, but now I really have latched onto that term. So we definitely do that with the kids. We help them understand how other kids think about things. We help them understand how their parents see things. We help them understand how their teachers see things. We help interpret the social world for them. And then I also interpret my kids for other people, right? I help their parents understand them better. I help their teachers understand them better. So yeah, I really love that concept of being an interpreter. But I think that's what we do a lot, especially in these conversations, is acknowledging the kid's perspective and helping them understand the other person's perspective. It could be another kid here at Starfish. It could be their parents, it could be their teachers, it could be us, right? But just helping people understand someone else's perspective. The next thing having to do with the connections and relationships that our kids have is something that I would say maybe the most common question that we get about our program, aside from logistics, right? Aside from where are you located, what time are classes, that kind of thing. Aside from that, the most common question I would say we get from people who are interested in registering is, how do you group the kids? Some variation of that, right? Who are the kids that my kid will be with? Some variation of that. So I definitely want to touch on that. Not touch on. We're deep diving into this concept, and I'll tell you where we've been with how we group the kids and where we are now, and why we do things the way that we do them, and why that will always be the way that we do them. When I first started, So when I first started, first of all, I didn't have enough kids to even really have groups. So I basically just had rough age groups because, it's starting a business of running social groups that require actual groups is hard. It's hard to get started when you require multiple people. So way back in 2016, I basically just had a couple groups because I happened to have kids enroll that were around the same age. And so I was like, okay, that works. As we grew, by the time we got to right before lockdown, so early 2020, we were big. I mean, we were in a big building. We were running 3 groups at a time in the evenings. We had 3 teachers. I wasn't even teaching. I was like just the boss, I guess, the admin, the whatever. So we had 3 teachers teaching 3 different groups every day. I mean, we had kids all over the place, and we separated by age and by ability. So each teacher would cover a certain age group, and then on different days, they would have different dynamics of kids. So, do you remember? Because Ramiro was our middle school teacher at the time.
Yeah, middle school and high school. And then the other teacher was like high school and adult. And the other one was like elementary.
Right? Yeah. And so one day you might have a group that's gifted kids, right? Kids that are middle school, and really high IQs. One day you might have a group of kids who are in special ed classes all day. One day you might have a group of kids who are super socially anxious and there's not a lot of conversations, right? So that's how it was. The couple years going into COVID is kids were separated into 3 different age groups. And then basically when a parent enrolled their kiddo, I would look at the roster, I would look at the class schedule, and I would say, okay, they're this age. So, this person is going to be their teacher. And then this is the group that's the best fit for them. And either that group would have an opening or they would need to wait until that group had an opening. So that's how we used to do it, is we determined the kiddos' schedule based on how old they were and how they presented socially. Lockdown happened. We were closed for 2.5 months. So that was the middle. We went on spring break. We had a school at the time. We had a school at Starfish Social Club and went on spring break and never came back.
Yeah.
Including our guinea pigs and our hamster that had gone home with kids. Yeah. So went through March. At the beginning of April, some parents started asking if I would do Zoom. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that's going to be a disaster. Like, no, I won't. But things just never changed, right? I mean, you guys remember it was the unknown. Nobody knew how long this was going to go on for. So I started doing Zoom, and in April, I remember I just did 1 hour a week. Like anybody who wants to jump on, and it's just going to be our chance to connect. So we were all on Zoom, and we just would have a conversation for an hour. We would practice asking each other social wondering questions. We would practice, answering other people's questions. We did show and tell because we're all at home. So what's something that you want to show the group? And then in May, a lot more of the kids jumped on the Zoom bandwagon because, again, it became clear that this was a long-term thing. And so I was running 2 or 3 Zoom groups in May. And it went much better than I expected it to. When we came back, we were able to come back that summer of 2020. And going into the fall, that's when the curriculum started to be created. When I realized that everything we've been doing before, I couldn't do on Zoom. So we went hybrid for probably 2 years, I think.
Yes.
Our kids could either come in person or they could attend via Zoom. And we ran the same group hybrid. So Ramiro and I would be in the group here with the kids that were here, and then we would have the computers on us so that kids who were at home could also participate on Zoom. We had TVs. I forgot about that. We had TVs so that everybody could see each other. So even the kids that were here in person could see the kids on Zoom. So at that time, at some point along the way, I just basically realized it was easier for parents to make a schedule that worked for them than for us to predetermine the groups. And so that's how we started doing it. Is these are the days that we have groups. These are the days and times that we have groups. You pick the one that works best for your schedule, or sometimes this is the only one that has an opening, because we do have a waiting list here. So sometimes that was the case, is, this is the one that we have an opening for. Do you want to take that opening, or do you want to wait, for a different schedule? So at that point, the groups just started being really mixed, not by age, because of our first class is at 5 and our second class is at 7. So by default, the younger kids come at 5 and the older kids come at 7. But game time is completely mixed. And within the younger and older groups, we have multiple younger and older groups. And so we just started letting people pick, these are the days that we have an older group, which one works best for your schedule. These are the days that we have a younger group, which one works best. And so the group started being very mixed in terms of kids' skill sets and abilities and cognitive skills and language skills and social skills. It was just a big melting pot. And what we have learned is that the kids do not care. The only people who cares is the parents, right?
Yep.
The kids do not care about the ability levels of the other kids in the group. When there are kids who are more challenged cognitively, it teaches our kids empathy, compassion. They become leaders. They are able to teach things to kids that they have learned. Also, a lot of our kids that have more cognitive challenges have better social skills. They say hello to everybody when they come in, when a lot of our other kids don't do that. They don't interrupt. They know how to ask good social wondering questions. They're curious about other kids. They're very helpful. They're very friendly. Of course, this is a generalization, but I think it applies to almost everybody that I'm thinking of that would fall into that category. And then on the other end, we have kids who are in gifted programs. Some of them are even in special schools for, because of their IQ or their, whatever it is that they're studying. They don't greet other kids. They don't know how to join a conversation. They don't know how to ask for help. Sometimes they're the ones, having really big reactions to things. So it's really interesting. There's no correlation between social awareness and age or IQ. There's no correlation between it. It just because you're older does not mean that you have more developed social skills than younger kids. And just because you're in gifted programs does not mean you have more developed social skills than kids who are in special education classes. We also find when it comes to game time, none of that matters either.
Nothing.
Yeah, the kids just choose to play with whoever wants to do what they want to do. When we look around at who the groups are during game time, sometimes we're really surprised.
Yeah,
it's kids that we wouldn't have thought would want to hang out together. We have one high school group. Almost all of them have been here for several years, and every single day that they come, every week on the day that they come, there's probably 6 of them. They all play the same game. They it's very predictable. I think one week they didn't a couple weeks ago, and we were like, what's happening?
Yeah.
But their cognitive abilities are all over the place. I mean, they're all similar age, but they're all over the place cognitively. Some of them are super chatty. Some of them are really quiet. Some of them are socially anxious. Some of them are have struggle with emotional regulation. They're just all very different kiddos, but they adore each other. I mean, they love hanging out and doing what they do together. And we have the same in one of our elementary groups. We've got 4 kids who always play together, and there's one kiddo in that group that is definitely more challenged all across the board. Social, language, cognition is more challenged than the other kids, and nobody cares. I mean, it does not matter to them at all. We've even noticed, we were talking about this before we started recording. We've noticed at least 4 specific pairings of kids where one kiddo would be considered gifted and one kiddo would be considered challenged. And they are very bonded to each other. Absolutely. So we were able, well, 3 of them, I would say. One of them is a kiddo who just kept asking about a kid who's no longer in our program, but they used to play together. And he just kept asking about, like, where is he? Where is he? And this kiddo, the one who's asking, is the one who's really intelligent. And the one who's not here anymore is much younger, actually, and was really struggling with his language skills, but they really love to play together. And then we have 2 kiddos who are on different, parts of the intellectual spectrum. They ride the bus together because they go to the same school. And they have developed this like brotherly relationship between the 2 of them. We've got students who've gone to prom together, even though they go to different schools. We've got kids who are some of our high school kids are in a group text together, all across the intellectual spectrum. So it's just so amazing to see the connections that the kids make and to let them make their own choices. Absolutely. About who they want to spend their time with. For the most part, we notice that the kids gravitate toward their own age group. The older kids tend to play with each other and the younger kids tend to play with each other, but they don't have to. They can make whatever choices they want to. It's just really interesting to notice that the kids do not care about each other's intellectual ability, social ability, language skills. They do not care. Sometimes we do have to have, when kids are new, sometimes it'll stand out a little bit. And we have those conversations about how we're all learning different things. And then they see how everybody else treats each other. I think for a lot of our kids who are in standard classes or advanced classes, they've not ever been in environments with some of our kids who are in special ed classes. I think there's a lot of stigma. And so sometimes we do have kids come in where you can tell they've never been in a shared environment before, and that there's some stigma around that. And then we have our discussions and they see how everybody else gets along totally fine. And then maybe 2 weeks later, you would never even know. One story I have, I really love this story. I've told it many times because number 1, it's an old story, but number 2, it's just one of my favorites. This was from, I think, 2017. It was either 2017 or 2018. It was still back when Starfish was young. And so our groups weren't always that big. And it was when we were still separating by age. So I remember one camp group that we had in our summer camp. There was a student, one day we only had 2 high school students. And so they were a group together. Very different ends of the intellectual spectrum. And the next day there were other students, because in camp, people make their own schedules. And so every day is different depending on who's here. There were maybe 5 students in the older group, including those 2 kids. And the kiddo who's probably one of the most intelligent kiddos that I've had the pleasure of supporting in this program, he just got really annoyed with the student who was not in the same place intellectually. He was just getting really, sometimes there's like repetitive behaviors or saying the same thing over and over because we're all in a different place. And so he got really annoyed with her, and he actually ended up yelling at her. And all the other kids in the group got so offended that he yelled at her. I mean, they were really upset with him for yelling at her. And so he and I went to take a break, and he was really upset because he couldn't understand why the other kids were mad at him when she's the one who was being so annoying in his words, right? That's what he told me. Steph, why are they so mad at me? Like, she's the one who wouldn't stop saying, whatever it was. So we had a conversation about how we all have different abilities, right? And he has the ability to listen to someone's feedback and make a different choice. And at the time, that student didn't have that ability. She didn't have the ability to hear someone say, please stop saying that, and just stop saying it. So we had a conversation about how the two of them are different. They don't have the same ability. And he said, well, she's just like ADHD or something, right? And I said, no, she's autistic, just like you are. And there was this long moment of silence. And it was so interesting. I could literally like see his, as they say, the wheels turning, right? And then he said, my whole life, adults have taught me to get along with all the normal kids, but no one has ever taught me to get along with other kids like me.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. Like, oh my gosh. And when I think about him, he's always been in regular classes, even, advanced classes. Some of our kids have siblings who also are neurodivergent. He does not. His siblings are also, they're on the neurotypical spectrum. And so I was just thinking, gosh, I bet he really hasn't been around other autistic kids. And he is not a kiddo that you would automatically think was autistic. It's part of that invisible disability. But gosh, that was in 2017 or 18. And I still think about that a lot, that, all my life, the adults have taught me how to get along with normal kids, and no one's ever taught me how to get along with other kids like me. And so I think this is why we no longer separate our kids and also the concept of ability is subjective, and it's variable, and it's random. Like, where do you draw the line? Sometimes I'll have parents that will say, I think my kid is higher than the other kids. One parent said that in particular, and the irony is that her kiddo was very intelligent and was the least socially aware kid in the whole group, doing things that the other kids would not even think about saying or doing. Had a hard time making friends at first because she was just, saying and doing things that were really not giving her a great reputation. So yes, intellectually speaking, she was probably on the higher end. But socially speaking, no. And so I'm very grateful that her parents took our feedback about that, and she stayed in the group for several months. I'm very grateful for that. And she made so much progress. Absolutely. Because she was able to learn from the other kids who were more socially advanced, even if they didn't appear to be more advanced, or, even if their language skills were more challenged, or, whatever the case may be. So there's no correlation between social ability and age, or social ability and IQ. Even speaking of age, we have a student who moved after spring break from our elementary group to our middle school, high school group, because she's like on the cusp. She was the oldest student in the elementary group. And so we asked if it would be possible for her to move up. So she's now one of, if not the youngest student in her, she's probably the youngest in her new group. You would never know. You would, except for maybe by her size, right? But you would never know from a social perspective that she's the youngest kid in that group. She's very mature. She's very self-aware, I would say. She's very thoughtful and kind toward the other kids. She's very engaged and involved. But she's the youngest kid in her group. And you would never know that. So it definitely does not have anything to do with age. And then, like I said, ability, somebody's cognitive ability does not determine their social ability. One of our kids that I would say is one of the more compassionate, kind, friendly, social kids is a kiddo who's in special ed classes. But he notices if other kids are having a hard time. He notices if somebody needs help. He gives really good feedback to the other kids, really good social feedback to them. He's super friendly. He gets along with everybody. So yeah. All right. I think we have covered that topic. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we want to add on top of that. One of the things that I'll say to parents sometimes is I cannot guarantee that their child will make friends here, because I have no way to guarantee that, right?
Yeah.
We all get to choose who we want to be friends with and who we don't. So cannot guarantee that your child will make friends here. I can guarantee that they will meet other kids that they like and that they get along with and that they have shared experiences with. So we've never had a kiddo that's come here that's just been like, yeah, these other kids suck.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has never happened.
And sometimes, and again, it's not the kids who come in who are like, well, I'm smarter than these other kids.
Right.
Or I'm better than them. The kids don't ever come in with that attitude.
Never.
I think the kids are really happy to be in a place that's very accepting.
Yes.
I think sometimes our kids who are higher on the intellectual spectrum have more awareness of what it feels like to be different and to be left out and to be rejected. And so I think coming here, they recognize quicker how different it is to be here than to be maybe in school or in other groups that they've been in the past. But also because we don't teach explicit, discrete social skills, we're not teaching things that kids already know.
Right.
Like this isn't a group where we teach kids how to say hi to somebody. And so we're not there's not a kid that's going to come here where we're going to teach you something that where like you're going to sit through a module and be like, I already know all of that. That's not the case at all. Even I'm thinking in our dating program, we've got a one student in particular who's just really very kind of intellectually advanced and on top of it. And even the things we were talking about last night in the class, I was having to explain to him, right? Like why it's not acceptable to be late to a date, right? That was the big thing that came up last night, why it's not acceptable to be late to a date. Because he's like, no, that's okay. Like, that's totally fine. Like, it's totally fine if you don't want a second date, right? I mean, we'll just say it because again, you can do whatever you want to do. Totally fine if you don't want a second date. The same student, we've had the conversation about, was it like maybe hygiene, like the importance of just keeping up with our hygiene. There's been several things where there've been conversations to help him be able to see things differently.
Yes.
Even though he's probably one of the intellectually strongest kids that we have, just helping him to be able to see things differently. Okay. Anything else that you want to add to this conversation, just about the relationships that our kids have?
I guess not necessarily, but we talk all the time about like what it's like when students first come in from years ago who are still with us today, the amount of connections that they've built with each other, the amount of relationships that they've been able to strengthen outside of Starfish, the amount of times that parents have come to us volunteering their feedback and like letting us know how their students have developed new relationships, whether it's at school or whatever other groups they're involved in. It's incredible. It truly is incredible. So I love being here. I know the students love being here too. So yeah, overall, the connections that are just naturally developed here, whether it's through the lessons or through the game times that they spend with each other, it's awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Ramiro. Thanks for adding that.
Yeah.
It triggered something else that I wanted to add, and then of course I went off on a tangent in my own mind, and now I lost what else I wanted to add. Anyways, okay. So we, registration for our summer programs is now open. We do have a waiting list for our in-person program here in San Antonio. You can join that through our website, starfishsocialclub.org. We also have registration open for our new Zoom classes that are happening this summer. So we are doing our first module, the identity module of our program, which is the foundational module, also probably our favorite module.
Yes.
Because it's really sets the stage for everything that our kids learn here. So we are teaching that via Zoom this summer. It is an 8-week program. We meet one evening a week. It also includes parent support. So it's 1 hour of live Zoom class time, for the students, followed by 1 hour of live Zoom parent support with me. So that is what we are doing this summer. We do have, we have a waiting list for that too. Registration is open. Because we try to maintain a certain ratio, we will only enroll a certain number of kids. So that's why we have the waiting list going, to make sure that we can kind of manage that number. But all that's on our website, starfishsocialclub.org. And if neither one of those work out, you can always just join our email list and hang out with us that way online, and see what we've got going on when we get closer to August, if this summer doesn't work for you. But the Zoom classes are really awesome. Even if you're traveling, you can just jump on Zoom. Even, if you're out of town, out of the country. So this is our way of being able to support kids that aren't in San Antonio, because we've just been local for so long. So this is the beginning of us taking over the world. And so we're able to support kids who don't live here. And I do think we'll have some local kids on Zoom too, because they're going to be traveling or doing whatever. So yeah, that's the cool stuff that we have going on right now. We have a couple webinars happening in the month of May that are free workshops. I'm trying to think of the timing of this. I think when this one publishes, the first one will be done. But we should have our second one the week that this episode is published. And so that will be on May 24th. So Wednesday, May 24th, we will have our second webinar workshop thingy live on Zoom with me, so you can learn more about our program and what we do. All that's on. That just made me realize we don't have a link to register for the webinar on our website. I should handle that. Okay, I'm glad I just said that out loud.
Yeah. By the time you see this.
Yeah. By the time we get this published, there will be a link on the website to sign up for the webinars. Oh, I'm glad I said that out loud. Okay. I don't know how I run a business. I don't know. I'm just as amazed as everybody else is. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.